current state of play with economics is a bit like creative accounting. Huge amounts of money now are involved in creative financial instruments and a type of digital investing where those who have the best machines with the closest physical location to the master machine, a thing called co-location, get the best deals, and it's software that does the trading and so on and so forth. And a huge percentage of the market now is over 60%, I think, is now trading by anonymous technical software applications on behalf of insurance companies and trust funds and government pensions and so on and so forth. So it's truly the age of the machine, and he who has the best machine wins. So only those with a huge great deal of money can really afford to push away at winning in the market. Well, almost everybody else thereby is kind of destined for second place at best, or to lose. You know, for every buyer there's a seller, so for every succeeder there's a failure. And it's the logic of finances and economics is such that it's really a gigantic lottery, but we attribute to the winners some sort of special ability to predict the circumstances. That is probably not necessarily so, yet their paradigms, the kind of groupthink they may or may not have, will be the ones that are promoted by the excess money that they have. So you have your Murdochs with a throttle hold on world media and so on and so forth. So we're buying into a perception that is monopolistic and has no fielded contrary instances, or it fails to get financed. The bullish people obviously feel they have a lot of money to pump the bull up further, but the bearish guys might struggle a little bit for public attention. So there's not a great deal of balance in the current state of play. And of course we have in the background many nations that have had sovereign collapses, like Greece and Portugal under threat, and Spain and England under threat, and Ireland and Argentina earlier, and Iceland, and of course the great wealthy, formerly wealthy or thought to be wealthy and powerful Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries. So we see that monopolistic thinking, the economy of Russia and Greece and Argentina, where the socialistic influence is fairly strong with the Peronistas, and the Greek government was rather generous, overly generous, in that people could retire at 48 with a government pension. This was just riding for a fall. And of course in the modern age we've taken the brakes off, taken the regulations off. Possibly the things we should most regulate is these derivatives, this topless money that I referred to before. And people feel that socialism has ended, but what they do not realise is that democracy itself is a kind of creeping socialism or creeping communism, in that, as de Tocqueville pointed out so long ago in his remarks concerning the revolution in America and the hopes for democracy in the future, almost 200 years ago, and he wrote, and the basic idea he pointed out was that democracy would end, as they all have historically, if you're honest. They last about 200 years and that's it, because they always end, as with the Roman Republic, with free bread for the people, which the state cannot continue to support. In fact, all policy, military policy, civil policy, legal policy, trade policy, becomes a way to protect, promote and advance this major aim of free bread for the people of Rome. And it distorted the agriculture, stripped Africa, which was the breadbasket of Europe at that time, of its trees, in order to grow more and more and more wheat and rye and other substances for this free bread promise. And the communists made the same promise, free bread. And it's not really about bread, it's about here in the modern times what free bread might represent: free money, free education, free medical services, free this, free that. The plain fact is there's no, in coffee terms, it's a bottomless cup. There's no end to it, and in my former term, there's no top to it. So the topless derivatives almost need to be invented to create this artificial, fluffy wealth, having no real substance. It's kind of funny money, really. Virtual money, which only has that value while it's in that financial market, but on the basis of it, many other checks, etc., are written. So it's a very curious situation, and there are many more financial instruments invented in a very creative way that I think should be looked at and made to yield a greater degree of reality. They are so abstract, they are so fluffy. I think that very fierce regulation and high taxes of the profits of them would render them, make them real. So that's probably something that should be done. Whereas on the other hand, maybe investment in real things, because we've seen the opposite, money taken out of real production and put into this fluffy market, because the returns for this short time, up until the Lehman collapse, were very great. Of course it's off again, but now again pumped up by printed money and government bailouts. Now this is not the market functioning in a healthy manner. So probably investment in real plant and machinery and real productivity, which is real good for any country, could be either not subsidised, because that would probably interfere with trade laws, but trade contracts and arrangements, but zero taxes or something, or very low, and similarly with other indirect investments in real things, like market investments, have the tax rates quite low there, and the regulations quite light, but have the regulations fierce and heavy, the more and more abstract the instruments become, to make them real, make them perform like real stuff. And it's a pity that the excitation factor that they represent, that they sex up the markets, they heat them up, is probably unfortunate. And the downside to that is they also chill out pretty rapidly as well. So when you see these things operating, you know the end is nigh. It cannot be anything else. But certainly the printing of money is a Weimar Republic move that can only lead to a complete destruction of democracy and the plausibility of democracy. I think it's mad enough now for some of us to feel that if this is what democracy does produce, it is exceptionally faulty. And then we have oligarchies behind the scenes of our democratic forces and our economic forces, and these are the people who really do run the show. And they support one party and the other party and any other third party that is necessary. They don't care who they pay, what their politics are. They really don't care as long as they get into office owing them an obligation. And we saw this with Mr. Obama, where he was in office and declaring that he would end the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and pull the troops out and all that kind of thing. And as soon as he gets into office, his real keepers, and they let him mouth off and fool the American public. But when he actually gets the office, they take him aside and tell him what he's really to promote. And this is as obvious as obvious as obvious. And it's happened to all the previous presidents for a long, long time now. And this is another fault with democracy, is that you have party block voting, and you only have to pay off the people who run this party blocks, and probably just the key players in the party blocks, like the party leader and the party administrative headship and so on. And probably very few individuals you have to thoroughly, utterly, completely support, and you've virtually got control of hundreds of millions of people. There are other forms of democracy that would work. A jury is democratic. Then the power, of course, rests in anybody overseeing the apparent randomness of the pick. A taxocracy, I've said before, is a possibility where the net taxpayers only vote because they are the people who put the money up. So let them say where it gets spent, and then every man then is rightfully grateful and to the taxpayers around them in their own location. So that's putting devolving power back down to the locations, the local areas, and spreading the celebrity kind of nonsense around a bit, which would kind of moderate that somewhat. The unfortunate thing is the modern age has a lot of myths about its own democracy, yet you can see quite plainly that the democracy of record, so the American democracy, has depended upon basically the exploitation of 90% of the planet to exist in such an attractive form, because many of the things that Americans afford for themselves, it's a nice idea to say, you could have universities or those kinds of systems all around the world. But let's give an example. Say you had $100 loaves of bread, and so everybody around the world, had free access to $100 loaves of bread. So, and incomes to match. So why would they, since they were creating this rich environment around, why would they buy your bread, or, when they were making it in their place? No, I haven't quite found an illustration to illustrate that point. But if you think about it, for people to live with such fabulous wealth, 2 or 3 showers a day, a change of clothes, morning and night, or 3, for sleeping in, and for morning, and then maybe for jogging or something. 2 or 3 cars, or more than one car each person, and things like that, and highways and airplane travel, and every year and all that kind of thing. It's not a matter of whether the planet could bear that, the carrying capacity or something like that. It's where do you make your exploitative profit from in order for you to afford that? Somebody has got to be, unfortunately, exploited somewhere else, cheap labour, for you to get a profit or advantage. It's either the workers or machinery or something like that. If everybody had the machinery, why would they buy yours and not theirs? They're going to buy theirs if all the price arrangements are similar in their location and so on. But historically, you can see that the support of any democracy, like in Greece, like in Athens or something, has required the whole Greek peninsula and the activities of many thousands of serfs and peasants and so on. The same with England and the barons in medieval times and so on and so forth. You can see this in a small scale. The produce of many, many valleys and plains will support one city with one big duke or baron or something, and that's it, and his small court of 200 or 300 or a couple of thousand people. But the efforts of 200,000 or 300,000 people are required to support that small court. They are free to be educated, free to read, free to have leisure, free to travel, free to explore things, but no one else is. Everyone else is locked in a 12-hour day or more, and they're exhausted, they're dirty, it's unhealthy, and so on and so forth. I don't say that exploitation needs to be dirty or unhealthy, but it's always been so. And this is the discomforting thought, that our democracy has been afforded by the cheap labour, which we so despise and we so get righteous about. But the person who's being righteous about it, it's ironically, the luxury of him being able to afford the political time to complain is afforded by the fact that he lives in a culture that is supported by such things. So, you can just hope that it doesn't happen to your culture as it's happened to Russia, where they have, at least for a period, and even now, are having to eat humble pie and operate at a much more realistic and lower level than before, and much more like a third world country than say the Chinese across the border in many cases. So let's pray to God that it doesn't happen to us. But what I'm saying is, despite New Zealand being a green country, a temperate climate, and a supposed tourist mecca, that's under question too, because tourists don't, on a whole, tour or visit poor countries, or unless an enclave is created to create the illusion of wealth, like a hotel zone, or certain beauty spots are taken over by the tourist industry, and the tourists don't go anywhere else but those spots, the rich and wealthy, you see. So that the illusion for them that all the world is like that is maintained, that operates in their way and their standards and so on. Yet the local people are in fairly dire poverty, serving them often directly. And New Zealand is fairly rapidly becoming that. Prime Minister Jim Bolger's prophecy that we would be fetchers of water and carriers of wood for others. And the curious thing is that democracy, liberal democracy in particular, is rather nasty on this score, is that the underlying basis for it is extremely heavy taxes. And these taxes are not democratic. You don't vote with your purse as to whether or not you will buy this goods or service. You're coerced into it. You're coerced into it. It's coercive. It's fascistic. So at the core of democracy is this fascism, this totalitarian IRD, tax department and tax laws that reverse all the legal position. You have virtually lost all your civil rights in the vicinity of the tax laws. We've lost all our civil rights in the vicinity of a parliamentarian, for instance. So you can't personally sue a parliamentarian for his policies, even if it's destroyed your company or something like that. So there are these fascistic elements of privilege and elitism still within our borders, and I think those should be released, to release the animal spirits of the colonial era. Our tax rates, the perception is that taxes are just one's income taxes. Say taxes to people, and I tell people I'm paying about 40% in taxes, and they say, well, no one's paying 40% in our country. And I was saying, hey, what about GST and ACC, accident insurance levies, which are imposed heavily on men, yet it's women who spend 7 times as much having been spent on them in our health system, and in fact the health systems of all the Western world. So democracy is a very female-based